Releasing in cinemas across Australia in May and June is a documentary called Flyways, The Untold Journey of Migratory Shorebirds. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director, writer and cinematographer for the film, Randall Wood. Randall, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's great to be here.
Great to talk to you. And I know this was filmed over 4 years approximately. Tell me about how this documentary came about.
I was really lucky, Peter, to grow up on a beautiful orchard, partially owned by my grandparents, called Mount Carmel Orchard on the shores of Moreton Bay near Brisbane. It's very beautiful. It was literally a huge orchard. And by the way, we introduced avocados to Australia from that very orchard a number of generations back. One day, my grandmother turned to me and said, "Look at those birds." And she pointed out shorebirds. And I was like, wow, they're so beautiful. So for a long time, I've had a kind of fascination with shorebirds. But later in my life, I was taking a lawyer friend of mine. In fact, she was Young Lawyer of the Year in Australia for a sail in my boat because I love sailing. And I turned to her and I said, "Well, make an interesting story where we could look at legal process and biology and conservation." And she turned to me and said, "Shorebirds." And I then found out that just down the road from our family farm at the time is now a massive development, 3,600 apartments about to be built on the territory of a bird called the far eastern curlew. So I kind of started taking interest in making this documentary about these birds. As it turns out, they are critically endangered, and there are 3,600 units about potentially to get built on their territory. So it became quite a prominent little issue for me from a local level. But being a filmmaker, I decided to make it international and tie that local story into a big international story. And that's what took me on this journey.
Absolutely, because I know you have a very strong background in filmmaking over a number of years, which I might ask you about briefly at the end of the interview. So tell me about the focus that you made on the three birds in particular and the way you filmed all that.
Well, when I say three birds, actually what I was really interested in is three flyways. The routes that birds take, we call them flyways. They're like, you could call them like highways in the sky. They stretch the entire length of the globe, and they're incredibly beautiful, almost like neural pathways that run across this, that you could sketch across the brain. These birds fly these routes. There's one in South America, there's one in Australia, of course, and there's one in Africa in our film. And they all run from these far Antipodean ends of the world to the north and back again in 1 year. So how do the birds fly these routes? We started investigating and meeting some of the scientists underpinning these researchers into these birds. And that's where we took a decision on the birds themselves and focused in on some of these sort of world heroes of these migrations. It's worth mentioning that there are over 200 species of shorebirds. So three is not many, but we did choose the three that we thought were perhaps the most interesting. Here in Australia, we've got the far eastern curlew. It's the biggest shorebird in the world, by the way, almost as big as a football. And that leaves Australia and flies right up to Russia and China and back again. In Africa, we chose the red knot, which flies from Mauritania in our story all the way up, right up to Taimyr Peninsula in Russia, Siberia. And then in Americas, we chose Chiloé Island and a beautiful bird called the Hudsonian godwit, which is a real, epic athletic bird. And that flies all the way to Alaska and back. So we followed each of those birds on their journeys.
And that's what I found so interesting, especially the scientists that you have selected to be part of the documentary. Can you talk about selecting them and so on?
Well, in Queensland, Australia, our natural choice, of course, was the experts. So we chose Richard Fuller, who runs a lab here called Fuller Lab in Queensland University. Of course, he's basically rallying against this development on Moreton Bay, doing everything he can to basically throw some attention onto the Australian issue, but he's also deeply involved in shorebird conservation across the world. So that was our choice here. In Africa, in fact, it was Netherlands. I went to the Netherlands as part of our research. I met a guy called Jan van Gils, who was a brilliant man, a true scientist. And he became the kind of person who was working with Red Knot, so we followed him. In the Americas, I was really lucky early on, and I always do this when I make a film. I go to conferences, like the top global conferences. So I went to one in Alaska where I met all of the great ornithologists across the region. And that's where we started to piece together the Americas stories based on that excellent research that we did early. And we chose there, of course, the Hudsonian godwit and a whole team who ranged from Chile right the way up to Alaska. Because, Peter, one of the important things to know about shorebirds is that they don't live in one place. They range across the entire planet and back again in a year. So when we talk about basically scientists working with the bird, often you're talking about a group of people, because the great thing about shorebirds is that they do connect cultures and they connect agendas across scientific regions. So you will get people working very closely together because they can only communicate, thousands of kilometers, ideally by research, data, and phone calls. So that's why we feature a number of characters in the story. In, say, the Hudsonian godwit's case, we start with one team and we then meet the opposite team at the other end of the world up in Alaska.
It's so interesting the way that the story develops of those three types of birds in particular. Tell me about the cinematography, because it absolutely looks stunning, and you must have been very, very careful in the way that you filmed all of this.
I was careful for more reasons than one. For starters, the kind of cameras you need to bring on these locations are very particular. It's very rigorous going and filming in very muddy, very vast salt plains in certain places in the world. And it's also very challenging to shoot in places like Alaska where there are risks. So I chose small cameras very consciously. I made sure I also chose the best lenses I could get for them. So I love Leica lenses. So I chose great Leica lenses. And I just kept it simple, but simple when it comes to shooting natural history is not always simple. We did have some massive challenges en route. Including, of course, I don't know if people know, but there are more people killed by a certain animal in Alaska than the bear, and that is the moose. And we were shooting in a fabulously named forest called the Ghost Forest, which I think is adequately named. And we turned around a corner, and there was a mother and her calf. So on that particular escape, because it charged us and we had to run, my partner and I, Deanna, who does the sound, we raced across a swamp and dove headlong into this muddy swamp to hide from it. But I did throw $30,000 worth of camera equipment at the moose.
Oh my goodness!
Without wrecking it, but it was that way of us surviving at the time. Hey, there's one other camera I want to mention. We made this film during COVID, and of course, being COVID was just horrendous trying to travel the world to make a global film like this. But we did get to the border between America and Canada, and we had to get into Canada because I'd lined up with a facility called the AFAR, Advanced Facility for Avian Research, in Toronto, a small town called London next to Toronto. And it's an absolutely beautiful place, but we couldn't get in there because the Americans didn't want us to go out and the Canadians didn't want us to go in. It was costing us $15,000 a day, not to shoot, because of course all that gear was just so expensive. That tunnel was expensive. So I just got very determined, and we just resolved that we would go across that border no matter what. We worked with the authorities, and after 3 attempts, we did manage to cross. So I just mentioned that because a Phantom camera, which we shot those very close-up shots with, is rather special, and we had to use it. I don't think there's ever been a shorebird shot in close-up in the way that we did in that tunnel. And the Phantom kit was essential for that. So, we just got determined and made it work. So there's a range of cameras, from very small stills cameras to something like the Phantom, to a range of other cameras in other locations. And of course, when it really got tough, we also did deploy crews to come in and assist us in the shoot. So Mauritania was shot by a French crew. And there were a couple of other shoots in the Americas we got some help on, but most of it was shot across 4 years. Oh, and one other point, when we say 4 years on a shoot, a lot of that time was research, and I never thought the research would make it into the film. But when I shoot, I always do shoot carefully, making sure that I catch it in case we need it. And as it turned out, with COVID and then the horrendous war between Ukraine and Russia, we had to draw back on that archive research footage I had. And thank God I shot it properly early on, because it became a core of parts of the film.
My goodness, the logistics behind this documentary is quite incredible. It's great to see that you had a number of production companies and other funding authorities behind you to make this film, because it's not a cheap film to make.
No, it's not cheap, and we thankfully got support from a fabulous philanthropic organization in America. It's called HHMI, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and they do support science. So they became our major support for this project, with PBS in America, Arte in France, PTS in Taiwan, and of course our fabulous ABC here in Australia. So we had a range of supports. And of course, I cannot but mention Screen Australia and Screen Queensland, who helped us out. But that kind of mash of fabulous supports helped forge this film.
Okay. Excellent, excellent to hear that. Now, I like the little animations of the various birds during the film. That's so nicely integrated into the story.
Thanks. And that's a terrific local Melbourne animator we worked with, Andreas Gomez, who I've worked with on many films in the past. And, we have a great relationship, and he's just terrific. He's so talented.
And I must admit, the music from Cezary Skubiszewski, who I know quite well, is just superb. It just adds an extra layer to the film.
Oh, I love his music. It's heartfelt. It's sort of, it draws you in, but also it has momentum and rhythm and energy that keeps you going. And as a kind of tribute to him, I wrote at the last minute, I decided to write and perform the credit music myself, because I am a composer by background myself. So I jumped on the keyboard at the very end of the project, and I do up a bit of a piece just to say thank you to everyone.
Oh, very good, very good. And it was nice to hear Mia Wasikowska's voice as the narrator.
Yeah, she's terrific. I love her tone. I like her attitude, by the way. She's also just a great human being who is passionate about conservation and biology and and ecology. So it was nice having just talking with her about that. I got the sense of a person with a real heart. And I think she brings to the film that feeling of heart and that connection that the film benefits from.
Absolutely. It's interesting that some years ago I saw a film called Winged Migration, which you may be familiar with, and it was so interesting to compare that with this one, which technically I think is even stronger. It's there aren't that many films about this sort of topic.
I think, Peter, that's because it's an incredibly difficult topic to make a film about. I mean, we look at shorebirds and they're kind of like on the cameras, they look kind of cute because they're on camera, but the reality of trying to film them at any level is hugely difficult. Firstly, they are often a long way away. Secondly, they are on very muddy environments often. Thirdly, they're not around long because they come and they go. So you have to be very poised and well placed to shoot them. And thirdly, trying to get these birds in the sky and shooting them flying is like shooting a ping pong ball just flying around like at high speed in random courses. So that's why we went to AFAR in the end and used the wind tunnel to shoot the close-ups of the birds in flight, because it was the only way we could really get those shots at that high quality level. And I think it's the first time a shorebird's ever been filmed in that environment, by the way. I don't think anyone's ever done that before.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I also found so interesting the issue of tagging particular birds so that you can follow them over their journey, and of course that in itself is so difficult, especially as those tags come off over a period of time.
And they become a core story thread for our film, because of course the scientists want to know where they go, they want to know how they survive, and they want to know what sort of threats they're facing along the way. And so those tags become critical in understanding the lives of the birds and the agendas of the birds, and of course the story outcomes. So we know, for instance, that here in Australia we're planning to build 3,600 units on top of the territory of a critically endangered bird. But where does it go after that? What's it going to face along its route? I mean, we know, just by the way, Peter, we signed a treaty in 1975 called Ramsar, which was actually forged in 1971. It was our duty as part of that treaty to honor these wetlands and not disturb the habitat of these birds. What we've done potentially, if the government agrees to this, is actually renege on that treaty, and we will be the only country in our entire region to pull back out of Ramsar and say we prefer a rather bloated attitude of a development to take over the territory of a critically endangered bird than we do basically honoring an international treaty that we've already become a signatory to. So, part of our film is, of course, our call to action, and we do request that people think about that and even pick up an email to their local member to say something, because right now, Tanya Plibersek will be taking a decision on this development in Tunda. And I know it's a Queensland-based issue in some respects, but it's not. It's actually national and international, because what we learned making this film is that each link in the chain is critical. You can't just have birds looked after in one place in the world and expect they're going to survive, because they need to travel from here across 20 countries to get to Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia or China. So our duty is core. And anyway, I mention that because there's nothing like basically taking up action at the end of the film and doing something about how the film might inspire you to do. And in our instance, we hope it might be basically some democratic action on the people, from the people who watch it.
Absolutely. I think your film is a very strongly environmental cri de coeur, if you like, to look after these birds and to make sure their habitat is not damaged, etc. I'm wondering if the film will be screened at Parliament House or somewhere with the politicians can have a look at it and perhaps get some idea of what might be in store.
Yes, it will, and we will ensure that. We're working on it right now. I mean, it's certainly some of my past films have screened in Parliament at points, so I do expect this one will as well. It's certainly timely for it to get that screening, and we're looking forward to a member picking it up and say, "I'll take it."
Okay, excellent. Now, I know the film is screening with Q&As with yourself, etc., across Australia this month and next month. It's an interesting way of rolling out the film, pretty much on demand in various places.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm enjoying it because I see a cinema being so different to a television experience. Firstly, it brings a community of people together. And so we've got a group of people there who can actually have a conversation with, which I'm loving. These conversations are really heart building, and they do show the capacity for people to come together and actually unite and on a cause. And secondly, of course, all over the world, we know that there are just, as well as people who love films, there's people who love birds. And, I've fallen in love with shorebirds as well, making this film. And I love the fact that these groups of people are coming together and actually sharing information back to the audiences. So we're actually getting some great talkers who are actually asking questions you wouldn't necessarily expect, a little bit left of field. I welcome them, by the way, in these Q&As.
Oh, excellent. Is there a website people can go to discover where in their area the film will be screening?
Yeah, there's two. There's our project website, which is flyways-film.com. And then, of course, there's also the distributor's site, antidotefilms.com.au, I think it is, which I'll just check for you. But certainly flyways-film.com will basically get people into understanding where it is. And it is screening. It's got now an extended screening here in Melbourne, where I'm at the moment, and in Brisbane, because it's been sell out in both of those openings. So they've extended both cinemas out. And we are now moving the film across to many regional areas as well, and we'll be in Perth this week as well. So it is rolling out as we talk.
Okay, and eventually the film will end up though on the ABC, I gather.
In the future, it won't be the same film, Peter, just so people understand. They will, in the future, they do see the better film. The cut down, of course, it is a cut down for TV, so it's a shorter version. I'm not saying it's not great as well, but just that it's a different rendition of the overall story.
Yes, no, I understand the television version versus the cinema release version. I've spoken to many documentary filmmakers where that happens. So tell me about your editing process with so much material, etc. The edit of the film and deciding what stays and what goes in the final cut, both in the cinema version and the television version. That must be quite a task for you.
Peter, I might give you a little personal story here. And I did mention this a little bit to some other people. 5 months ago, right in the thick of outputting our fine cut for this film, I had a builder come and work on my building, the edit suite, and he left a ladder up with his tools on the roof and left the job. And I climbed the ladder to get down the tools, and I got not just tools down, I went down with the ladder, and I hit the concrete. I broke 16 bones. I smashed the base of my skull, 5 vertebrae. I was in hospital in ICU, unconscious for 3 weeks. And I've been working for 5 months now to learn how to talk again and walk again. And here I am, I'm talking, thank God for the doctors who helped me. But it's been quite the experience. I would say, actually, add to this, in waking from 3 weeks unconscious, I actually woke dreaming about shorebirds and flying with them, which is, for me, one of the most beautiful experiences of my entire life, to have that kind of to be almost guided back into life through this experience that I know well now. So tying all that back to editing. Of course, we were thick in the middle of editing, and I had this fall, and then had to go through a huge recovery. Luckily, I had a terrific team helping me, and I just take my hat off to all of them for picking up this project when it needed picking up and helping us get it across to the finish line. When I became conscious enough, I came back on, and by that stage, we were in the throes of outputting the feature. I was able to grade it. I was able to mix it and make sure the narration was recorded well, and all that got bedded in afterwards. But it was certainly the experience, I've got to say, going through this personal experience and then tying that into the edit experience and still coming out okay. And I do take my hat off, by the way, to the Australian medics, particularly the hospital I was in, because my God, I'll never, ever, ever complain ever again about paying tax.
Oh my goodness. What an arduous journey for you, and but it's great to see the finished product. So I just wanted to ask you, Randall, you've made many other films. I gather they're mainly in environmental nature sort of area?
No, not at all. I like making all sorts of films. So I made one about innovation in condom development for internationally for a few years back, which got great reception across the world. I've made one about the evolution of earthworms, and particularly earthworm taxonomy for National Geographic, which did very well around the world. And more recently, I love making arts films as well. I am a musician by background. I studied composition at the Conservatorium in Queensland. So I also made a film about Havergal Brian, a terrific and kind of very unconventional composer, and his humongous symphony called The Curse of the Gothic Symphony, which is another film I made a number of years back, which did really well also as a feature around Australia. So, and on. Like I've been lucky to work on lots of different types of films in different regions. I mean, I see making a film a little bit like doing a PhD. You know, you kind of give yourself I usually give myself about 3 years to make a project. And I just devote myself to the content. You know, my next project, which I'm working on right now, I'm just loving the content because it's so unlike anything I've ever explored as a film before, but it's very heartfelt and beautiful. The new one.
Oh, that's great. Can you say broadly what the topic is about?
Absolutely. It's called Love Safari, and it's basically about sort of gender fluidity in animals and what they teach us about ourselves and who we are. So, you know, no one knows, for instance, that 7 out of 10 giraffes are gay, potentially. And or about the Lycian albatross, who spend an entire life in a beautiful lesbian relationship and only go out to meet the male just to basically bring back some sperm for the young. Or the fact that penguins just love gay penguins just love raising their own young when they can. So we're trying to sort of using that content to make a very interesting project that looks at basically what animals teach us about ourselves and who we are, and how to respect love and connection and compassion and empathy in our own relationships with the people around us. So I'm loving this project, and I'm looking forward to getting it up and running fully. We're still basically raising funding, but there we go.
Wow, you've made some really interesting films, and especially Flyways, and now your next project sounds terrific. Look, congratulations on Flyways, and we've been speaking to writer-director of Flyways, Randall Wood, a film that's now screening in selected cinemas across Australia. And Randall, thank you so much for talking with me.
And thank you, Peter. It's been a lot of fun, and take care.
And you
enjoy
too.
the film. Thanks so much.
Okay, all the best then. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.